Well, welcome to the Beyond Cinema studio up here at Sundance. Enis, Joe, Will, the composers. It's good to have you guys up here. It's a bit of a different flavour to what's been going on. Like having you work at this festival, I know you were a Sundance fellow essentially back in 2007. So for you coming back here, like what does this whole Sundance thing mean for you guys?
Well, it meant a lot to actually have a movie here now after having been at the Sundance Labs, which has been a phenomenal experience. You in these labs you meet so many filmmakers and fellow composers, and you become friends with some of them. And I came to the festival back afterwards, so coming back to Sundance was like meeting, coming back to family almost. And now having a movie here is really exciting.
Yeah, and Joe, for you working on the Raid and then the Raid 2. And did you ever anticipate the amount of hype and cult attention that the film got?
Absolutely not. I wish I had the foresight to see that, but when Mike and I were brought aboard the first one, we had assumed we were doing a direct-to-DVD kind of, at the best, like a little cult film, that a certain audience would love, but it's really kind of amazing. I think that's the best thing about doing what we do. We just kind of work in a dark room for months, years, and it's kind of that movie magic when it kind of gets out there and changes people's lives.
Well, I feel like you've been here probably every year for the last 6 years or something, right?
Things like that.
Between Another Earth and 28 hotel rooms and did Nobody Walk screen here as well?
It did, yeah.
So for you, does it just feel like this is just on your calendar and some place you have to go?
I've been very fortunate to be able to come here with a movie for the last 5 years, I guess. So yeah, it's become kind of a regular thing for us. And my band would play here. This is actually the first year that we're not performing, which is kind of a weird relief, to be honest, not coming here with the traveling circus that I normally come here with. Yeah. But yeah, it's wonderful to be here this year with 2 movies, and yeah, I'm thrilled.
And what does it feel like for you? Is that the first time you see it with an audience? Is here, or
I guess it is. We, sometimes there are test screenings before the festivals, but generally with these 2 movies, yeah, they were finished pretty last minute. So, yeah.
And so, how did it feel the other day with the first one?
It was amazing. Yeah, really good response, and Mr. Boot's a pretty unusual documentary, and I feel like it went over really well. And yesterday went really well as well with High Origins. So.
Yeah. Scoring films about international arms dealers doesn't come along every day.
It doesn't, no, it doesn't. That was a really fun one, actually, because it's kind of it's a Russian, obviously he's a Russian guy, spent a lot of time in Africa, so it's kind of like a sort of Russian Afrobeat dance score. It's kind of weird.
There's a Fela Kuti movie that's here at the moment as well.
By Alex.
Right, exactly. He did WikiLeaks.
Right.
And then, but you guys got to have that lovely Lady Gaga track right in the middle of that
That's right,
film
which I think that might be my favourite scene from the whole movie, Julian dancing to Gaga.
So talk to me about that too. Like you mentioned, like having this African vibe or whatever. How much does location for each of you, the location of the film, how much does that influence it, or is your natural instinct to go against it?
I mean, for a documentary, I guess it was kind of pretty important just to kind of paint the geographic picture of the story, and it's it's an important part of who he was as an arms dealer, spending a lot of time in these different countries. But with Origins and some of the other movies, it really just depends. Every project is different, and sometimes geography is informing the score, sometimes it's not. I mean,
yeah, for the Raid, it was interesting because it would be so easy to fall into that trap of, oh, it's an Asian movie, let's use some Asian instruments. But we wanted to really enhance the scope of the film, because it is a film that is pretty universal in terms of emotion, in terms of, just feeling the action. So we deliberately, on the first one, Mike and I deliberately decided not to use any Asian instruments. For the second one, it was more or less the same, but there was one character who really embodied this old culture of Indonesia that really did silat, the martial art that's in the Raid, did it in a very old school way, very formal. So for that character, we chose to use a few just select ethnic instruments that hopefully don't get in the way, don't kind of overwhelm anything, but just do what we intended, which is just kind of enforce that old school nature of this character.
So did you take the opportunity to learn those instruments, or did you take that opportunity to find out who the best guy was?
We had 4 weeks to score the whole film, so we unfortunately were using recordings of these instruments and manipulating them in a way that would fit the score.
Very cool. And for you, Enis, location, geography?
I think it makes has a huge impact. Since I've scored many movies in Europe, I can say that when I work on an American movie, the pace is different, and location does have an impact on the overall feel of a movie. So I would say tempo and certain aspects have an influence, and then you have to choose if you go for the ethnic route as Joe described or not. And it depends on the movie, if it's a universal story or if you want the flavor or not.
Yeah.
And
how often do you get to actually be on set? I know some composers are off in a room in LA and they get the dailies, or they get it at the end when the first rough cut's done. Like, how often do you get to go on?
Well, I think I went to maybe 5 or 6 sets in the last couple of years, so not so often. Only if the director wants me to, or if there is an opportunity where it makes sense to, experience the atmosphere or meet certain people, part of the crew, or come to a warm-up. But on set, obviously everybody's very concentrated on getting the movie right. So.
Do you like being on set? Do you find it?
You know what? I enjoy it.
Yeah.
At the same time, I try to not get too much inspired by it, but because obviously in the end, what you see is really what you should enhance.
Yeah. And for you guys, do you like getting down and being on set and having that part of the process, or do you
I kind of agree with Enis. I think it's better to just sort of have that perspective after the edit, after all the choices of takes have been made. Sometimes it's great to kind of experience the family of the collective of people that are making the movie, but I think to kind of be able to step back, we come along to kind of finish the process, and it's an important part of, obviously it's an essential part of making a movie, scoring it and changing the context of what's been created. So I think it's good to have that sort of distance, I think.
I have a fun story with that, because normally I would agree that it's almost like the Wizard of Oz. You don't want to see how the sausage is being made. You don't want to have the magic ruined.
Sausages in
Well, not the Wizard of Oz. Sorry, but, yeah, I'm just exactly the New Jersey version. But you don't want to peel back the curtain and see it's this tiny little guy. But
right.
For me, I had this experience where I flew to the set of Oblivion, this movie I scored earlier this year, and I saw a very emotional scene being shot, very kind of critical. It was in New Orleans. It was one of the sets on the Sky Tower. And I was really concerned because I'm watching this extremely emotional scene, and I know that this is going to be one of the key moments of the movie, musically as well. And I was just kind of on a mind trip after that, going. And it was one of the last parts of the movie that I approached, because I was just so concerned that I'd remember all the other takes and all the other versions, and I'd just be screwed, But I managed to score that scene. This is ridiculous. I had the cue done and going to the dub stage in about 2.5 hours.
Nice.
And it's interesting, because I wonder, because I was on set, was I just able to capture that emotion really quickly and just kind of work on the cue, or I don't know. Just an interesting story.
Yeah.
Like, you've each worked with other composers and different musicians, whether it be Daft Punk or Jan Kashmerek or whatever it is. Like, do you find that a lot of the process takes place between you and another musician or another composer, or between you and the director?
I think the whole process is collaborative, and obviously there's always a dialogue with the director, and if we bring people in to work on the score with, it's kind of dependent on the relationship with that person, whether it's a co-composer or a musician, and everyone brings their own personality to the process.
It's like sometimes the director might have 2 editors, working in 2 rooms, and it's kind of the same thing. Sometimes you're working separately, sometimes you're working together, sometimes you're on the other side of the planet and you're sending files to one another and kind of almost remixing each other's work. It really is a project to project process where it really depends on the nature of the collaboration, the nature of the film, and I find that very exciting.
Has there been a particularly strong director who's super musically inclined that you've worked with that maybe surprised you?
Yes, I mean, actually the movie by David Nant, The Wetlands, that's here right now in Sundance, I guess it was one of my closest collaborations, because he had a very strong vision about how to stylize the film and how we would create a certain feel through going through history of music and in terms of pop culture. So obviously we were exchanging a lot, and to answer your other question, I think it depends really who's included in the creative process. Obviously, we're composing the music, but we're listening to everyone who's around us, and whoever sits in the room and has an opinion, it influences us, and we decide in the end how to bring this together. So I think it's very key who is part of the process and who is being included. And
In terms of your own internal education, do you find that you're most often inspired by other composers or other musicians outside the world of film scoring?
That's a good question.
Yes.
You know, I try to keep the iPod very varied, so that I'm not just listening to film scores. I'm not just listening. You know, there was a whole period last year where I was listening to nothing but Fela Kuti, which is awesome. And my music sounds nothing like that music, but I find that that really inspires my own creativity. Listen to something that is so different from what I do. I love going to museums for the same reason. It's a completely different medium, and it is equally beautiful, if not more so, and it kind of inspires what I do. But a lot of inspiration also, I think, probably for you guys too, comes from the film, the way the directors shot the film, the cinematography, the pace of the cut, almost the color scheme. You know, there's so many variables when it comes to shooting a film that sometimes I find the best thing to do after listening to a bunch of music, going to some museums, is just sit in a dark room and spend some time with the picture and really learn the picture.
And what's in the cup on the desk?
Espresso.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Will, for you, is it more about listening to other musicians, or do you listen to film scores and other composers
It's
too?
kind of all over the place for me. I mean, I grew up thinking I was going to be Cannibal Adderley for the first 15 years of my life, and then discovered techno, and then got into film scores, and I kind of always wanted to be a film composer. So film scores and composers of movies have always been an important part of my daily playlist, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of just listen to all kinds of nonsense, to be honest. Yeah.
Enis, you want to say?
For me, it depends on the project. So I like to dive into different directions of music. Like for a certain project, I would suddenly to listen to a completely different set of music just to get inspired as a overall direction. It's very interesting if you do a period movie to listen to period music of that time, or if you work on an electronic score to listen to electronic music. So I really like to actually change my taste for a certain amount of time, or just be open for everything.
And you wear neon headbands and stuff during that period?
Excuse me?
He's from Berlin.
Yeah, exactly. Glow sticks and whistles. Very cool. Okay, so just to put you all on the spot finally, in terms of major influences for each of you along the road, Enis?
You know, for me, it's really, as Will also said, film music in general. Obviously, I should mention John Williams, Michael Nyman, Jan Kaczmarek, who I've worked for a long time. And on the other side, it's electronic music. I mean, obviously, everything that's around right now is so inspiring, and we see such a big shift. So I'm very inspired by electronic and classical music, so in general.
Joe, name names.
I was in my early 20s when I started working on Tron Legacy, and I spent 2 years with Daft Punk learning in the studio. So they were a huge influence on the way I think about music.
And the way you dress.
And the way I dress, exactly. I left my helmet outside, unfortunately. But, also, John Carpenter, Bernard Herrmann, I grew up listening to John Williams, which got me into film music. And then I also spent my youth listening to hip hop. So it really is, this kind of smorgasbord of stuff kind of cooking at any one time.
Will?
My first record was a Ennio Morricone record, so he's a huge influence. Bernard Herrmann, Vangelis is a huge influence. Wendy Carlos.
Yanni.
Yeah, easy. But yeah, it's a pretty broad.
Very cool. All right, well, thanks for coming in and spending a few minutes. It's been fun talking to you guys. Yeah, cheers.